Buddy, welcome to another edition of Carlos and the Fish. I am the Fish, and joining me once again is Marco Squitieri from the Dairy State. Big guy, what's happening, my friend?
Hey, happy to be here, Fish. Ready to talk some NBA with you. Let's do it.
Yeah, I thought we might do that. The draft was just a little over a week ago. I think it was last Wednesday. Got it, and you know what's interesting? They broke it into 2 different days. Now,
hmm
I thought they did real good with that, but I also thought they made a mistake, Marco. So before we get into a little bit of a recap of round number one, uh, let's talk about the fact that they broke it up, the NBA's first round, into one night. And then the next day, they had round number two. Now, I'll say this. I like them doing that in this sense that when you have them put together, this is not the NFL draft. So honestly, after you get done with the lottery, it's kind of, and you don't know a lot of these names. You don't see these people play. They play halfway around the world or in the G League or something like that. So you don't get to see them the way you would if it was like a college football player and then going into the draft or something like that. So I like the opportunity to showcase the second round, but then to do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday when people are still at work, everybody's at work, and you don't really, and so, yeah, the second round is featured, but you don't really got a lot enough people watching it. So I like the breakdown of one night to the next. I don't like doing the second round in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Obviously the NFL breaks it up that way, but you have it so the first round is usually on like a Friday, and then you do have it in the middle of the day, but it's on a Saturday. People are more hanging out, it's more visible. It was kind of strange. I was aware of it going into it, but even being aware of it, being aware of the breakup, it did kind of sneak up on me that next day. Like, oh, it's the middle of the day. I'm just going about my stuff and here are all these picks coming in. Here's Kyle Filipowski going off the board all of a sudden. And so, yeah, I did think it was interesting too. You did have that first time where they had the draft, both rounds on the same day. You never really had those moments of like guys in the green room who didn't get picked. We see that in the NFL more so. But so seeing that for the first time in the NBA was definitely interesting. But yeah, definitely maybe some readjustments in terms of scheduling. But I do tend to agree with you. I do like, kind of not only just giving the second round more of a chance to stand out, but also I feel like it gives the first round, not that it doesn't necessarily have that allure, have that aura to it, but having it as its own standalone event, I think is really good in terms of just like strengthening the fact that yes, this means something, this is a distinction, this is important. So I
Yeah,
like
for sure. Now, and with the NFL, the way they do it, they'll do the first round on a Thursday night. On a Friday night, they'll do the second and third, and then on Saturday,
that.
when everybody's home, the real draft nerds can sit down and go from 4 through 7 all day long, about an 8 hour deal. That I dig, but I'm with you. I like breaking it up. Just don't like the setup. Maybe they'll fix it next year. Now let's talk. Let's get to the meat of it and talk about the draft. The Atlanta Hawks had the first pick in the draft, and really that was where the biggest part of the mystery was what Atlanta was going to do, and really what Atlanta is and what their identity is. I mean, they've made some moves here. I think Capella's probably on the way out the door. They've made a trade on draft day. You still have Trey. He's productive, but how happy is he and what's around him? They decided to go with Richerscheit, but I kind of thought Alexander Sarr was going to be the pick. I think he's probably more ready from a defensive standpoint. Obviously, I felt like he was more of a ready-made prospect than Zachariah might be, but clearly Zachariah is more about the offensive upside for the Atlanta Hawks. But what did you think about the Hawks decision first overall?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting move. I thought as we were moving more into this draft process and as, the lottery kind of shook itself out, we did kind of come into it thinking that Sarr was going to be, in a draft with no consensus number one. He was as close to it as we had. But Sarr, is a guy who didn't even work out for the Hawks. So clearly, I think on both sides, just the fit wasn't there. And because it's a situation where the talent isn't so overwhelming, he's not this can't miss generational guy where you make room for him. If you have a guy like a Victor Wembanyama, you make room for that guy, even if you don't necessarily need a center. And I just don't think for the Hawks, they saw Sarr as that guy. Now, in terms of the pick itself, I like the fit. I like his versatility as a defender. Like you said, obviously, he's more of a project. He's not going to be a guy where he's going to come in and we're going to really feel his impact day one, in my opinion. I think it's definitely more of a 2 to 3 years down the road. But look, I like the fit. I think he can guard kind of 1 through 4. He's long. He's a tall guy. He is more of a project, but he can kind of fit that 3 and D role. And he's a guy too where maybe he doesn't end up developing into being a guy who's a number one scorer on a team, right? But I
Right.
know I know he has that potential where he can be that solid number 2 on a championship team. And you look at a team like the Hawks too, a team that, look, they weren't good last year, right? But at the same time, they weren't at the very bottom. This was a team that kind of almost, I don't even want to say almost, they lucked into this spot through the lottery. So they're in a more unique position where maybe, when you still have a star like Trae Young, there's still that kind of that hope, that inclination that, okay, we can maybe still build around this kind of general core that we have. Maybe it's a more of like a tweaking process versus just, shipping everyone out and really restarting from ground zero. So in that sense, I do think it's an interesting pick. I think it's so hard to project though, because like I said before, it's more of a potential guy. It's more, we're drafting this guy for his ceiling, for what he could be versus what he's going to be doing for our team day one this season right now.
Yeah, and and I like where you go with that, because I think that sometimes it's the pick that you make is dependent upon where you are. As a franchise, maybe more so than where that player is in their development stage, And look, I mean, the reality of the situation is there's no real expectation in Atlanta right now, not of playoffs and when playing for championships right now. So even if this is a 2 or 3 year play, the upside is very high with Zachariah Richerscheit. So I'm certainly okay with the pick, because as we mentioned, there was not a runaway first overall pick here. If this is last year, I mean, it changes. It's crazy because it totally changes the face of franchises, or at least gives that the ability to. Several years ago, if you remember, the two most struggling draft teams in regards of needs with what was happening in the city and their places were Memphis and New Orleans, and lo and behold, somehow those ping pong balls fall just right. Now Zion and John Morant, neither one of them can string a healthy season together for one reason or the other. But they changed the fortunes potentially for those franchises. Memphis was, I mean, they were have anything to build on. The same thing for the Pelicans, and now they both do. And those guys are the reason. So now, if they can ever stay healthy, they can be superstars in this league. I don't think there's any question about that. With Sarr, I think, the thing about it is with Washington, it's another place where there are no expectations, but he is someone, as I mentioned, and we always, we look at the NBA now and we say, well, this is just a perimeter game. And if you look at the scoring, that sounds true, but go and look over in the West and all the post players that are starting to be accumulated over there in the West. I'm not saying we're going back to the 80s and 90s with our back to the goal or anything like that, because that's nowhere near to be the case. But there are some quality big men on some of the better teams in the NBA. And I think Alexander Sarr fits that role for the Wizards. And again, they're a long way off, but he's a true piece that you can build around. So I like that one. We've talked about him a little bit. So let's go to number 3, and a player that I know we both like a lot. I thought Houston, there was a lot of smoke that they were looking to get out of 3, and that they, maybe move back, acquire a few picks here and there. But I got to tell you, they stood pat where they were and maybe that's what they had planned to do all along. But they end up with Reed Sheppard. And when you look at Reed Sheppard, you think, well, this is the best shooter in the draft. And you'd be right about that. But the thing that kind of gets lost about Reed Sheppard is, guys, Reed Sheppard had what did he test? What was it, a 42-inch vertical?
No, yeah, the dude's an athlete.
It's just not just about a spot-up shooter. He is definitely good at that. But if you're out there and you think that Reed Sheppard cannot finish, you've lost your mind. He's extremely athletic, versatile, can get to the bucket, create his own shot. And that's what you got. That's not all about screens and helping him get open. He can get open on his own. But, yeah, if you're not in his face, he buries you. And if you get too close, he gets a step, he'll finish with that 40-plus vertical at the rim.
Yeah, absolutely. A really, really versatile, perimeter scorer, a guy that can really attack you from different angles. The one big question I have to ask you here, Fish, though, is with the fit. I mean, you have a team in Houston. They just gave Fred VanVleet a max contract. They just drafted Amen Thompson last year, a guy who's been playing more so in that guard role. They still have Jalen Green. I mean, look, if you're looking best player available, Reed Sheppard was the obvious pick to make, right? I mean, you listed off all the accolades. One of the most impressive players we saw in college basketball. My question is, does Houston have a plan? Do they have a plan on how they're going to utilize all these guys? Because you can't run out all those guys on the floor at the same time. Now, I'm not saying they have to do that. Having depth is obviously something that's incredibly, incredibly important in this league. But I'm just wondering, was this more of a pick of, hey, we don't really have a guy that we see that can maybe tackle more of our immediate needs, and we just want to get more talent into our roster, which is not necessarily a bad way to go about it. But I'm just curious if they have a plan or if it's more of a let's get talented guys in the building, let's just see how things sort themselves out.
And it's weird because I mean, the reality is this was a BPA all the way down the line. He was clearly BPA in my mind. Well, I guess it depends on who you are. But at that point, if I were the Rockets and I feel like BPA is where to go, I know I'm getting it. I want you to think about it like this. Compare this to the NFL. The only time you don't go BPA is if you don't have your franchise quarterback. You have to get them. The possible exception is you are really, really hurting for a blindside tackle to block it. To block your franchise quarterback and you don't have it and you're getting him killed, i.e. Andrew Luck, things like that. Then you do that. But I've always appreciated the BPA because what you know is I'm getting a quality player. Yes, I may have somebody at that position, but I would rather do that than draft somebody who's a lower basketball prospect, a lower player whose upside is not nearly there. Can he help me in a certain position? Yes. If there were a rim rattler out there, if there were this monster big out there or if there was this point that you just couldn't pass up was so good, that's one thing. But those things weren't there. He was clearly the best on the board at this time. I don't care who I've got. I'm not going to pass that up if I'm the Houston Rockets because I know I'm bringing in a high quality player.
Yeah, I mean that's the holdup for me too, is because the only point I would make is that the guy who goes one pick after him, Stefan Castle, I see him fitting in a little bit better. But with that being said, I think the gap between those two prospects is sizable. So like you were saying, if it's a BPA type of mindset, I mean, I can't argue with you. He's an outstanding player, an efficient scorer too, which in the modern NBA, where you're not going to be coming into a team like that with other scorers, you're not going to be getting, an unlimited amount of shots. You have to do what you do with what you're given. He's a guy who's shown he can execute in that type of environment. He's a guy I'm really excited to see what he does going forward.
Oh, no doubt about it. And you mentioned just a second ago, but let's go to that fourth pick for the Spurs, which this was probably the easiest spot to slot, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because Stefan Castle, what did he say? Not working out for teams with established point guards. The Spurs clearly had the need and the opportunity to grow because basically you're growing right alongside Wembanyama. You know,
Yeah.
Now, I will say this: I wonder what Stefan Castle thought when the Spurs brought in Chris Paul.
Yeah.
But you're not going to turn down an opportunity to have a veteran like that. Now I don't know that they're a playoff team yet, even with these additions and Wemby in his third year, because the West is so
Yeah.
tough to navigate. I mean, it really is. But Stefan Castle, I had a lot of people that I talked to that said that Stefan Castle is going to be your NBA Rookie of the Year and may have the biggest impact immediately. But there was very little doubt, unless somebody moved and jumped and got him, that Stefan Castle was going to go to San Antonio. And that's exactly what they did. They didn't overthink it. And I love the future of Castle and Wemby.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree that going into what was projected, these top four picks pretty much went chalk. Guys went where we pretty much expect them to go based on the buzz that had been kind of accumulating throughout it. And especially with the new addition of Chris Paul, it's a pick I really, really love. I mean, who better to develop under than a guy like Chris Paul, a guy with a wealth of knowledge, and this is a guy, like you mentioned, defensively, his impact is going to be there. You're going to feel him instantly. The big question, though, is obviously, and it's been beat to death throughout the media, but it's the 3-point shooting. 27% from three in college. That's just not good enough for a guard in the NBA. That's not going to cut it. At the end of the day, it's a new league. It's a league where everyone's got to shoot the three. Everyone's got to be able to score the basketball. And he's not going to be a guy who can do that day one. Now, obviously, these are things like shooting. These are things you can work on. These are things you can develop. And I'm sure under Greg Popovich's tutelage, I mean, the best possible spot for a guy like that. But yeah, a guy with that championship pedigree too. I mean, just guys like that who have really excelled in college, who really shown that they know what it takes to play winning basketball, especially in a team like San Antonio that hasn't been doing that, a lot of that in years recently, is a guy with that right mentality coming in. And like you said, with Victor Wembanyama, I mean, I would agree with you. I don't know necessarily next year they're a playoff team, but one thing I know is they're going to be a fun team next year. And they're going to be a team that I'm going to be excited to watch even more so than last year, seeing what they can build there, seeing that guard tandem work. And, it's going to be really, really exciting.
Okay, you froze there for just a second, Marco. I didn't run out of things to say. You froze, so I didn't know if you were done yet. I will say this before we move on from San Antonio. I want you to think about Stefan Castle. Now, he just spent the last couple of years being coached by Dan Hurley, and
Mm-hmm.
now he goes to Popovich. That right there alone, beyond the skill talent, which he clearly has, I mean, it's hard to find somebody who's going to be coached better than he and prepared to run an offense. So the other stuff, you hope that he learned that it takes care of itself as he grows. Maybe the shot improves a little bit. But I'll take somebody with that type of resume all day long for sure to run the point for my team. Let's go now. We mentioned chalk, but there ain't no way that you had what Detroit was getting ready to do at 5. There was talk of them potentially moving out, but they go to the G League Ignite. They get Ron Holland the second, and you talk about an athlete. There ain't no doubt about that. Ron Holland certainly fits that bill. Now, me, and this is just a hang up for me, Marco. It doesn't make me right. I'm probably very wrong about it. And we can cite examples. I'm not big on drafting out of the G League in the first round. And I'm really not even sure why. I'll be honest with you, because it's certainly comparable to college basketball, maybe better, depending on how you look at it. But I'm probably not taking my first round pick out of G League unless somebody's just clearly that good. If you're looking for an athlete, Holland is it. He is it. But 5 for me out of the G League. I'll take a wait and see. I thought he was somewhere more along the lines of 10 to 14 for me.
Yeah, definitely a guy that going into it felt like more of a late lottery guy. Obviously I think in a draft like this where the talent is sparse to be nice, I don't mind it as much taking a reach on a guy with those big physical tools too. If you feel like this is a guy who you see the potential, you see the room for growth, I don't hate it as much. In terms of selecting from the G League, I got to say I partially agree with you. It does always feel weird. I think part of that is just because it's a new thing. We haven't really had that guy yet who's come out of there and really been that stud, developed into a superstar. I think once we see a prospect kind of reach their potential coming from the G League, I think that's when I'll start to feel a lot more comfortable about it as a developmental means. But yeah, definitely a surprising pick. I was kind of slating more about one of his teammates, Buzelis, a guy who ended up going to Chicago much later in the draft. I would
Which,
have been.
which is great because he's from Chicago, and it was one of those born to be a bull type of situations, I think.
Yeah, but so that was a guy I more so expected than Holland in this spot. Another guy who really, really struggled with his consistency in basically all aspects of his game, right? He was in a tough situation. It wasn't an ideal spot for him in terms of he wasn't on a very good team, right? But he still really didn't show the consistency you'd like to see from a top 5 pick. But with that being said, there are the physical tools there. 6'7", right? Like he has the frame. And another team in Detroit too, which is they're a raw team. They're a team that they need help just about everywhere they can get it, right? So he's going to be in a spot where he's not going to be expected to be playing really high leverage minutes, high intensity basketball. He has a star in Kid Cunningham where he can kind of lean on. He doesn't more so have to take on as large of a role as he was taking in the G League. So I think that'll lend towards a more smoother development. But also, like you said, he's a reach for a reason, right? If this guy was a sure thing, he would have been slated much higher, right? We wouldn't all have been shocked on draft night when we heard this guy's name called. So an interesting pick for sure. Detroit's a team too with a lack of direction these past couple of years. Monty Williams, that whole debacle. It's really hard to trust their organization right now. But you don't like to write a guy off before he's played a minute of NBA basketball.
I will say this for Detroit because you're right there. They're the worst team in the league. They are.
Absolutely.
I think Bickerstaff got a raw deal, to be honest with you. So I think they got the right guy for them. The question is, how patient are you going to be? Because this is not a coaching league. This is a players league. I don't think he deserved to be fired. And I think the expectations aren't there in Detroit. So maybe it has a little more leeway. And he's a good coach. I believe he's a very good coach. I think he got done wrong because they didn't go any further with them, the thoughts they were supposed to. But the reality is the roster comparatively to those top 3 or 4 teams in the East, they weren't good enough for that. That's why that was the issue. It wasn't a Bickerstaff thing, but that's for another day. We'll highlight about 4 or 5 more guys in the first round than anybody else you want to take a look at. Let's talk about a guy who ended up going 7th overall, and we saw all the way going up until draft day. We saw anywhere from 1 to about 10 for Donovan Klingit from UConn. The 7 foot, what is it, 7'1", 7'2", I think it is.
7-2, yeah.
Very versatile kid. I mean, there's a lot to like here, and it's a perfect fit for Portland. They absolutely have the need. We talked about big guys in the West right now. Portland has theirs. Very athletic, and was looked at as the best overall versatile big man. And Sarr's one thing, but I think the offensive output for Klingit is one that you look and say, okay, we can do something with him too. He ends up going 7th overall. There was talk about 3 or 4 teams trying to trade for him. None of that ever materialized. I think the offers were made, but nobody saw anything that they liked enough to make a move. We thought Charlotte might do it. We thought Houston might do it. Detroit might do it. None of them did. He ends up in Portland. What kind of impact do you think he has?
Yeah, I think this is a guy who's going to have a really big impact day one. I think this is a guy that the Blazers, when they're sitting there at 7 and they've seen this guy fall to them after, kind of the chaos that ensued at 5 and 6, they're licking their chops. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but a match made in heaven, right? A team that was, how long has Portland been thirsting for a big like this? Somebody who can fill that role, who can defend the rim, like you mentioned in the West.
Greg Oden was going to be, initially.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that just shows you that was almost close to 20 years ago at this point, I mean,
15 years ago, I think. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but, having a guy like that where you can pair him with Scoot, we talked about it earlier too, a guy who has that championship pedigree, who knows what it's like to be a winner, who's been coached up by a great coach. These are all things when it's a draft where there's not a lot of people with necessarily stats jumping off the page at you. You got to look at some of these more intangible elements, a great defender, a tall guy. Obviously, there are questions on offense. There's a reason he fell to 7, right? If he was this golden prospect, he would have gone at 1. But look, a guy that I know Portland's going to be really, really happy to get, a guy that I was super high on just watching college basketball, a dude who, when you see him out on the court, he was a guy who was always making an impact, right? You saw that in the tournament, always making an impact, always affecting the game, even if he's off the ball, someone that I'm really, really excited about. And Portland, a team too, that, they're kind of coming off that hangover of having a superstar for the long time. It can be hard to find your identity. I think this pick goes a long way in them establishing this new era that they're trying to build right now. Did I freeze up again?
You did. You did. I wanted to make sure I gave you enough time in case you were still talking. I didn't want to jump in over you. So from time to time, you're freezing. So if you see me just looking at you, it's just because I don't know your time. All right, so let's keep things going. We got about 15, 20 more minutes before we got to wrap it up. But let's go to number 8. And this is interesting because now there were several trades, and this was one of them. And Minnesota finds their way in there. It looked like a Spurs. It's a Minnesota one, but they get Rod Dillingham out of Kentucky, who for me, I mean, he's buckets. That's who he is. That's what he does. He puts points up. And in this league right now, that's at a premium. That's invaluable. He can score. He is a scorer. And the best part about it is you put him on a team, which is now a veteran team. You put him out there with Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, and the bigs in there, and then Cat is in there. You still got Rudy. I mean, there's a lot to like about a team that was already very good. Dillingham's all about buckets. I think he's going to be a guy that you're going to look at it. And now I don't think he comes in and gets 15, 20 points a game, but just simply because of the veteran experience of the team they already have. You're not going to cut into Anthony Edwards' production to make sure Dillingham gets something done, But I think that, maybe you patch him in with that first unit sometimes, especially if there's injuries, run with that. I could see a world in which Dillingham averages 12, 13 points a game as a rookie.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fish, in terms of a fit, I think this is maybe my favorite fit of the draft. A guy where his big question was the defensive side of the basketball, coming into the number 1 team defense in all of the NBA last year. You can't ask for a better fit than that. Learning under a guy like Mike Conley, one of the real veteran guards we have in this league, a real presence, a guy who's still producing, even in his, as he enters his later veteran years. I'm loving the fit. I'm loving his ability to potentially come off the bench, provide them some of that scoring, some of that that kind of oomph, that kind of that fire, that pop off the bench that they were almost missing last year. We saw it in the playoffs. This is a guy I think can be making an impact for them day one. Scoring is something that I think translates a lot easier. If a guy can shoot in college, he can shoot in the NBA. most of the time. I don't want to talk too generally, but typically speaking, if a guy's hitting open shots in college, he's going to hit them in the NBA. This is a guy I think they're going to be able to work him in a very, very creative way. They obviously do have that established backcourt right now, but I really think there are a lot of interesting opportunities for him to kind of work in with that first unit, like you were talking about, really making that impact and having another young guard to kind of build up there with Ant, another scorer. I really love this pick. I can't say enough good things about it. And Minnesota is a team I am just more and more excited about every single moment, looking forward towards next season.
All right, so I got 4 guys I want to highlight in this round, and then, of course, whoever you want to highlight to, we'll do that. But I got 4 that I want to take a look at. And one, admittedly, before I even mention his name, I'm just going to tell y'all I'm a monster Memphis Grizzlies fan. So I kind of, you'll see a little bit more emotion pour me out on this one than maybe the others. They all matter, but if you see me get a little bit more fired up, this is it. It's interesting because there was so much talk about how they needed to make a play for Klingit, and that was the guy. They got to have a big man, and they clearly had that need. And I don't know. I guess I just figured and I'd been talking to people all pre-draft about where that window is for Zach Edey. And we set the over and under at 18.5. Because, you look at the mocks, you look at everything, and it was like, okay, well, they like him, but this, but that, but he's slow, all these other things. And so while Memphis clearly had that need, there's no doubt, it looks to me like Zach Kleiman got exactly the person who would have said, well, they tried to go up and get Klingit, but when he was asked, he said, look, the draft turned out exactly the way we wanted it to. Now, is he telling the truth? I don't know. But what I do know is that Zach Edey is a proven commodity, period. The 2-time National Player of the Year, 7'4". So they certainly have the need. But for all those people that are out there that's like, oh, God, he sucks. He can't move. Okay, let's look at a couple things here. First of all, when he went head-to-head with Klingit, he murdered him.
Yeah, no, you can't. You got to look at that.
I know who won the game, but it wasn't about who's on a better team. We already know that answer. UConn could have beat all-stars in college basketball if you put them together. That's how good UConn was. That wasn't Zach Edey's fault. Purdue did not lose because of Zach Edey, because he dominated that game. He dominated UConn that game. Then you go to the NBA Combine and you start doing measurables. I'm not just talking about how tall he is in the reach there as well, but athletically, the intangible. They charted like 6 different things. And all I hear about is how stiff he is and how he can't move, and Klingit is the guy. Guys, not only did he smoke Klingit, he also smoked him in the measurables. We act as if Klingit can fly up and down the floor like a deer, and Zach Edey can't move. And it's just not true. It's just not true. And the beauty of it here is you're going to put him, potentially, depending on how they decide to do it, you're going to put Zach Edey on a team that has 2 former Defensive Players of the Year in the starting lineup with him. You know? And if we were asking Zach Edey to come in and score 20 and 10 a game, okay, I can see why that might not work. If we were asking him to play for, let's say, Charlotte, something like that, maybe. But he absolutely, beyond the need, fits perfectly for Memphis for what they are trying to do. And if you're looking to go in the paint, if you're trying to finish with Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr., around the rim.
Good luck
with that. Good luck with that. You're going to hack him at foul trouble. You hack him at when it's late in the game and critical. Go ahead. He shoots better than 70% from the free throw line. He's an excellent shooter.
Yeah.
So, to me, there's just not a lot of downside here. There's really not. They absolutely had the need, and I talked about BPA, but at 9 in the NBA draft, how many players out there were just stone cold deathly and had the opportunity to affect an NBA game more than Zach Edey at that point? And the answer is nobody. This made all the sense in the world. And again, if he comes out there, gives me 10 points, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks a game, I'll run butt naked down Beale Street. I don't care. That's perfect for what they're looking for. I love the pick.
Yeah, I will say, Fish, this is going to pain me a little bit as a Wisconsin Badger. I'm going to have to say some nice things about Zach Edey, which I don't like to do because that guy caused me a lot of torment over his career at Purdue, I have to say. But I think a lot of the narrative around Edey is it's almost not his fault. It's almost the fault of his team, the fault of him being too good, and the fact that they had to play this style with him where he was playing this post up, traditionals like 90s, a way that wouldn't kind of project his game to translating towards the professional level. But I think a lot of that was more about the fact that, look, nobody in the Big Ten could stop him, right? I watched plenty of games where we were doing everything in our power to try to stop this guy at the rim, and we couldn't. So I think a lot of the fact is, if you have something that's so dominant, if you have a way to win games, of course you're going to do that. And maybe that leads to this guy not showing off his skills, maybe the skills that project a little bit better towards the NBA in a way that's a lot more suitable for people. I think another part of it too is the fact that the guy's so big, the guy's getting every single call, right? It's an infuriating style to watch sometimes. It can lend itself to some hate. But with that being said, I love the fit so much. I love it. Him and John Morant together on the same team. I mean, the possibilities of those guys running the pick and roll, I mean, it's really something that makes me excited. Like you were talking about with Jaren Jackson Jr., I mean, you want to talk about interior defense, especially when you're looking at teams like Minnesota with the big guys that they have, you look at, I mean, just so many up and down the West. It's big guys, big guys, big guys. Interior defense is becoming more and more important in the NBA, especially in that Western Conference. And who better than Zach Edey, right? And in terms of
Davis, I mean, look, there are big men throughout the West. They needed one. I love Jaren, but he's not a 5.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the one thing I'm going to say about Edey, though, is there are reasons that people have these concerns. There are things you see. I know you talked about the way that he tested, but in terms of watching the film, watching the games, watching the way he played, the way he moved, there were times where it didn't look like I was watching an NBA prospect. In the same way that you see some of these guys, you see guys who might be a little bit more raw, but you can see the way it projected. A lot of the times when I was watching Edey, it felt like I was watching a good college player and not a good NBA player. But with that being said, it's hard to say that a guy who's 7'4", who's a 2-time National Player of the Year, doesn't deserve to go in the first round, doesn't deserve to go in the lottery. When you're having that level of success, that has to mean something at the end of the day. It has to mean something.
Right. And,
playing good.
We keep talking about him having to get prepared for the NBA. I think the NBA also has to prepare for him. 7'4" with touch doesn't grow on trees. And this is not Hashim Thabit. This is not, this is a guy who will muscle as well. He will fight. He's a worker. So I like him quite a bit. Let's get a couple more because we're running out of time. I'll tell you what, I thought the Kings made out like a bandit because if there was one player that I would have wanted at that point and that wasn't Zach Edey, it would be Devin Carter. Not because his father's an assistant on the Grizzlies, but because this guy does just about everything. He is a tenacious defender, but he can score as well. He's a both ends of the court type of guy. And man, you put him in there and that young Sacramento team's a bonus. Obviously Fox and Murray. Man, I mean, there's just a lot to like about Sacramento. Devin Carter went to the perfect team for him, I think.
Yeah, a real guy with that, that classic Big East grit to him, a defensive menace, out there. A guy that I don't think they maybe expected to see at their position. They were at 13, I believe. Another pick I really like, a guy, who I think, like you said, is going to make a real impact coming in. He kind of has that versatility where, yes, they have guards who are already productive for them, but he can kind of fill whatever role they need. A guy that I'm really excited to see develop. And just the big thing I have for him is just his defensive ability. And not a really tall guy either. I think he only stands at 6'2", but really showed still that he's willing to make an impact on defense, really get his nose dirty, really fight on that perimeter. That's a guy that you like to see, especially, when you're going a little towards the end of the lottery and as you get to the rest of the first round, you're looking for two things. You're looking for high ceiling guys and then guys who really have that grit, have that motor, have like that tenacity to find a way to make themselves be a productive player. And that's what I really like from him.
Yeah, this is not my player comp to him because it's an old comp, but kind of a versatility on both ends. He's not the scorer that this person was, but do you know who Michael Jordan said was the toughest the toughest person that ever guarded him was? The one that he had the most trouble with? Now, this was a guy who could also score too, but he was a tenacious defender, and that's Mitch Richmond. That might be a little bit before your time, but I'm sure you remember the name Mitch Richmond.
I've heard the name. Yeah, I've heard the name.
It kind of reminds me of that. I'm not saying he's the player comp, but those are the type of players, the throwbacks that this league right now may have trouble with. Because it's one thing to show defensive tenacity, in June, in May, but when you show it in January, That's what you like to see, and you're going to get that with him all the time. All right, couple more real quick. Let's talk about Dalton Knecht falling out of the lottery, Marco. For me, and I like Dalton Knecht quite a bit. I'm surrounded by Tennessee fans, and they were very angry at the Grizzlies when they didn't draft him, which is ridiculous. You don't draft people based on where they played in college. That's just stupidity. But Dalton, a surefire scorer. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like because it was only 1 year at that level of production in what we would consider power basketball, power four conference basketball at this point now, if you will, or was it that he was a specialty type of player? If you're looking for buckets, kind of like Dillingham, you know what you're getting. He's buckets, he's buckets, he's buckets. But what else is he? Look, it's one thing that the Grizz didn't take him, but he fell completely out of the lottery. In your mind, why did that happen?
Yeah, I think the age probably plays a role in it. I mean, you have a guy who's 23 years old. I think at this stage in the NBA, I think so many teams are just hung up on looking for high potential guys, looking for guys who, maybe they just don't see his impact, his fit for them, especially if you're a team that's maybe not in a contending space right now. You're a couple pieces away. There's still going to be some serious roster construction going on. Maybe you're just not interested in a guy who his biggest value to you is what he's going to be able to do right now. He's a guy where he comes in on the Lakers, he's making an impact day one. He's a guy that's going to be getting quality minutes for them. And maybe a teams just would rather, okay, yeah, sure, we have this guy. He'll give us 20 good minutes a game, but I would rather take the risk on a guy who, yeah, he might turn out to be nothing, but he's got that superstar potential. He's got that star potential, So I think
I agree with that totally. I just think for me, if I'm drafting a guy in the lottery, it's not somebody that I think might play 20 minutes a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I get it. It depends on who you are and what you need. And I like Dalton quite a bit. He stacked good ball on top of good ball, against good quality opponents. So I have no problem with him at all, but I do understand. And you mentioned the age, and I think that's a very fair analysis on why he ended up at 17. The Lake Show got a great pick there at 17. I'm going to highlight one more player, tell you who I thought had the best draft. Then you pick a player or two and tell me who you think had the best draft. And then we'll wrap it up for the day. I'm going to go all the way to the second to last pick in the first round, and that's Isaiah Collier. Why did he almost completely fall out of the first round? Isaiah Collier is a great basketball player. I don't know if I'm not really sure what made him slide this way. I thought he was anywhere from about 10 to 16, something like that. Ends up going 29 to Utah.
Yeah, another guy too. At most mocks I looked up leading up to the draft, he was kind of slated as late lottery, maybe early 20s, but a guy who really took a tumble. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why. I mean, he was incredibly productive last year he was on a bad USC team, which I think maybe that can tend to scare some teams away if a guy's, a first option, a leading guy on a team that not even just like a mid team, they were outright awful last year in the Pac-12, right? But I mean, he seems like a really productive player, a good size, 6'5", I believe. Yeah, I wish I had better answers to give you, Fish, but I really don't. A guy that in a draft like this too, a draft where it wasn't like there was an excess of talent, especially in the late rounds, I can't for the life of me figure out how this isn't a lottery guy. I mean, this is a guy who's shown production, who's shown that tenacity, and I think the Jazz got a good one. I think they should be excited over there.
I think they should too. And I will say this, the guy that went before him, Ryan Dunn, to Phoenix. Ryan Dunn might have been the best defender in the whole draft, or right up near the top of it. And he ends up going 28th overall. So I really like the back end of this first round, the last couple of picks. Now, in my estimation, if you will, and they had 3 picks, 2 in the first round and then 1 at the very beginning, second pick of the second round, I think it was. But for my money, my top grade goes to Utah. Now, with Cody Williams, and he went, was it 10 or 11, somewhere around there. Cody Williams from Colorado. That's an upside play. It is there. He's got everything you're looking for. Flashed it at Colorado, kind of disappeared at times, but I think he hasn't even scratched the surface of what he's going to be. But when you take Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, and then to get Filipowski in the second round, all 3 of those guys I can see making an impact for the Jazz. So you walk away from the NBA draft, you get a quality player. That's one thing. You walk away from the draft and you get a minimum of 3. That's a win for me. I like the Utah Jazz and what they did.
Yeah, and then for me on my aspect, this is another guy we haven't talked to as well about as well. Bub Carrington at 14 to the Wizards. I mean, I have to say it's a bit of a homer move, but I love what the Wizards did adding this guy. It was kind of a questionable trade, a trade that went down a few hours before the draft, sending Denny Advia away to Portland in order to get this pick. A trade that at the time when it went down, I was very, very apprehensive about. Really didn't understand what they were doing. A guy like Denny Advia, he's on a very good contract. He's improving every year. Didn't really make sense to me. But adding a guy like Bub Carrington, a really explosive guard, a high motor guy, a guy at Pittsburgh who really showed production, showed tenacity, showed his ability to play multiple roles, and a team like Washington that obviously no one needs to hear this, but they're not very good, right? He's going to have an opportunity to have the ball in his hands, to really show what he can do, to find his place. Pairing him with a guy like Sarr, and we talked about Sarr earlier, improving the defensive side of the ball, the side that the Wizards, I think they were one of they gave up 54.8, the most points in the paint per game last year in the NBA. They needed a guy like that. So getting a guy like Sarr at the top of the draft, and then a guy like Bub Carrington in the middle teens, I believe it was at 14. They're my winners. They're a team that I'm really excited about moving forward. It's going to take a couple of years, obviously, but it's the first good day in Washington for basketball in a long time, it feels like.
And I will say this, and I agree. I like them quite a bit. I think both those teams scored big. Uh, for a draft that was supposed to be meh at best, I thought some teams really did help themselves here. This was not a high quality draft. It wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
At least on paper, but good grief, you never know. But I really felt like there's about 7, 8 teams. So even if this draft wasn't super strong, really did themselves well. And this draft ended up being a little more. I was really, coming into this draft, like, this is one of the most boring drafts. There's nothing, there's nobody. But then as it started unfolding, it's like, okay, it was a little bit more interesting. It ended up being a pretty good draft, especially when you feel like your team hit a home run in it. So it's all got to play out still. We'll see what happens. But the NBA, the 2024 NBA draft is in the books. Free agency and things going on right now. Teams making moves. Some teams standing pat. So we're getting ready to be done with all of that. Get ready for summer league basketball, which will be a lot of fun to watch. But overall, I really enjoyed the draft, and I hope you guys enjoyed talking about it this afternoon with Marco and myself.
Yeah, no, really excited. Really, I mean, just a lot of evolving change. Obviously, in the NBA, you cut off for a second there for me, but yeah, I'm really excited to see how things move forward with free agency underway. The league's always changing, right? The NBA never stops. That's what's so great about it is there's always something new moving forward.
That's it, Marco Squitieri. My name is The Fish. This has been another edition of Carlos and the Fish on the Walker Talks radio platform, my friends. Marco, we'll do another one next week, my friend. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
You too. Great to talk to you again, Fish.
Thank you, brother.
All right, guys.